Hey guys, welcome back to the Quad Method. My name is Steven, and in this video, we're going to be talking about quad tendencies. These are mistakes that quad players typically make naturally or subconsciously. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to identify it as a teacher or as a performer in order to make your students or yourself a better quad drummer just by being conscious and aware of these tendencies. So with that, I hope you enjoy. So if you're not familiar with the term tendencies, it basically just means something you do over and over again, whether you mean to or not. In our activity, it typically has a derogatory connotation, but I think it's also important to identify the good tendencies you have because those make up your strengths. In this video, however, we're going to go over more of the bad tendencies just so that hopefully you as a performer can identify and you as a teacher can identify in your students to help fix some of the issues that are very universal regardless of what you're playing. So here we go. The first tendency is one that typically happens a lot and something I mention a lot in my videos and in person. It's the tendency of letting our emotions affect our rhythms. So when we're playing quads, we typically start off with one drum and we talk about playing rhythms correctly. And basically playing rhythms correctly involves getting the stick up and down in a timely manner. And more importantly, in a consistent manner that allows us to play smooth rhythms at any dynamic height. However, when we take that and we move over to quads, now we have a horizontal component that we have to also compensate for. We have to travel not only up and down to get the correct dynamic and the correct sound quality, we also have to move that stick side to side to change the pitch of what we're playing. So to kind of illustrate this point really quick, I'm going to play 3 counts of just going down and up and just show you kind of what I mean. What you'll notice is that it doesn't seem like I'm doing a whole lot of work side to side, which is true. I can focus on the articulation and the consistency of the rhythm because my side to side effort is not that much. But something you need to keep in mind is that regardless of what you're playing and how fast you're playing it at, there's one universal constant with quads, and that is the distance between drums. So as you speed it up, you have to kind of make sure that you take that into account because now you're trying to get from point A to point B in a shorter amount of time, which means you have to increase your acceleration, which means you got to put more force into your horizontal motion. And when we move side to side, especially as we increase the distance, we're basically allowing ourselves to we allow the opportunity to put more rhythmic space in between each note. If you hear quads playing scrapes or playing just anything that's moving around fast, the tendency is always typically to open up the rhythms as they move around the drums. And as you speed it up, that issue kind of gets magnified. So I'm going to play the same thing I did earlier, but I'm going to play a little faster just to kind of illustrate that point. So as you might have noticed, I'm definitely putting a lot more energy output as I increase the speed, especially on the outside drum motions. Like that requires a lot more energy than it does up here. So basically what young quad players need to learn how to do is compensate for the horizontal distance they have to cover so that their rhythms don't get distorted. What motion is causing them to, make their rhythms worse? But I think it is important to realize if your understanding of what you're playing is what's causing you to play it poorly on the rounds, or if it's the rounds itself that's causing you to play it worse than when you play it on one drum. And that's a struggle that all quad players go through and still go through. Even the guys in world class still have to figure out ways to play the harder, faster rounds just as well on one drum. The second tendency kind of goes hand in hand with the first one. And the second one is a lot of times quad players don't hear the rhythms under all the drum changes. When we focus on what we're playing on one drum, our pitch doesn't change. We can strictly focus on the rhythmic accuracy and the sound quality of what we're playing, which is important. We need to understand what it's supposed to sound like and all that. But once we start putting it on the rounds, a lot of inexperienced quad players and less mature quad players, they only hear the pitch changes going on rather than the rhythms that are underneath all of that. This is a skill set that quad players need to learn how to do because in the end, what they're going to be fixing is their rhythms and their sound quality. And if they can't hear the rhythms under all the rounds, it's really hard for them to identify what they're doing wrong. So make sure when you're teaching quad players or when you're playing quads, you play it on one drum to establish the rhythm, and then you play it on the rounds with the intent of listening to the spacing between each note. And then you can start to hear the rhythmic discrepancies caused by the motion. Then we can go back to the first tendency and say, oh, I'm not playing this part as well as I should be because of a motion thing, but I know that was the wrong I know that was a mistake because I could hear that rhythm opening up as I was going drum to drum. And as a teacher, I think that's also important. Make sure that your kids are using your ears, but more importantly, they're using their ears to identify the rhythms that they're playing. Third tendency is one that all quad players are probably familiar with, and that would be quad taps. First of all, if you don't know what quad taps are, go watch quad lines play and try to identify passages where they're supposed to be playing at piano and try to find a group that actually plays like true piano heights. My guess is that you're not really going to find very many, and that's because we have this stereotype called quad taps. And if you don't know what quad taps are, it's basically when quad players try to play tap height when they're moving around the drums, and then their taps end up being like a lot higher than they should be. First of all, it doesn't look good. It doesn't show a lot of discipline in your heights. But the reason that's kind of a stereotype, or the reason quad players do that so often, is because when you start moving around the drums, there's a natural lift in your elbow to get up and across the drums. That's just natural. That's just how quad players play. And I don't think you should try to suppress that. I think you need to compensate for that, because if you try to suppress it, you end up going to have to adjust the way you move around the drums completely. But basically, yeah, so quad players turn their wrist up to what they think the tap height is, but then they also add that little extra lift from the elbow to move drum to drum. So then instead of being around 3 inches or whatever your tap height is defined as, it ends up being like 4 or 5 inches, which is definitely too high. And there is an argument where tap height or quad taps isn't necessarily a terrible thing as long as you're producing a tap sound, which, I can sort of get, but I think it does look a little sloppy, and I think there is a better way to go about doing it. The quick fix is, if you have problems with quad taps, basically you just need to turn your wrist less. And keep in mind, I always advocate wrist when possible, because this is where all the articulation really comes from. However, sometimes we need to compensate a little bit if we're just playing big taps while moving around the drums. But again, as long as you're producing a good tap quality, the heights matter a little bit less. It doesn't look as appealing when quads play like 5-inch taps. But I'll say 99% of the time when quads play quad taps, they're not producing a piano sound. They're producing like a mezzo piano sound. So those heights are not justified in that case. Anyways, that is all I have for today. If you have any more tendencies that maybe you want to see talked about, leave them down below. These are just a few that I thought of recently, so I thought I'd put a video together for it. But hopefully you as a performer or you as a teacher can identify some of these in your quad players or yourself to help get rid of these small little details or these small things that are kind of making you just not as good as you could be. So that's all I got. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.